This presentation was originally shown in March 2024 at RIDE's Math4All conference. Please note this QR code here will give you access to these slides if you are interested. Navigating math improvement, leveraging all staff to make improved math outcomes for all students happen. So how do we improve math outcomes for all? This presentation is clustered very broadly in three big buckets: the why, the how, and the what. The why. Every system is perfectly designed to get the results it does. So what does our system look like results-wise? This is the RIDE State Report Card for math outcomes. Here's all students, students with disabilities. Next school, all students, students with disabilities, all disabilities, all disabilities, all, you get the pattern, right? You can see that as we scroll down across the entire state, we see sizable achievement gaps in math outcomes. While our math growth data might look better, some schools have growth between non-disabled peers and disabled that actually look similar. That's still not good enough, because if your non-disabled peers grow like this, and students with disabilities enter with a gap, which we know they do, they'll never, if the growth is the same, they will never close the achievement gap. Systemic problems require systemic solutions, and that is what we are here today to talk about. So take a moment right now and listen to this video from Dr. Atul Gawande. He's the author, well, he's a doctor, a researcher, an author. He wrote the Checklist Manifesto. And, you know, a lot of his research has to do with leading systems change. How do we make systems that are very complex with lots of specialized roles become more effective? And the Checklist Manifesto is about saying sometimes it's as simple as a checklist, but that getting people to follow a checklist can be really hard. While he's talking about medical field, the medicine, I want you to think about what he's discussing with regards to education.
Knowing what to do is not the same as knowing how to do it. So the first question, what do you do to lower surgical deaths? Now we knew a how, use a checklist, much as they do in aviation. How do you get people to use a checklist was another puzzle. And over the years, what we found is that the combination of really needing, you can't just pay them or create a regulation that says you have to do it. You have to recognize it's a culture change and walk people hand in hand through a hospital process, a team process, where they can get everybody on board with making a very complex change, even though it seems like a simple 2-minute checklist shouldn't be so complicated.
So it's really about culture change, not just ticking off the boxes.
Yeah, and leadership. So, you know, surgeons are used to the idea that no one tells us what to do about the way we do our operations.
Captain of the ship.
Captain of the ship, and I make the rules. The idea that there would be a standardized way for any component of the way that we do things, the way we communicate, the way we plan, the way we work together as a team, that's what the checklist was really doing, was saying we're going to have a scripted way that we discuss what the goals of the operation are, how we were going to get it done. And that was the culture change, to go from cowboys to pit crews, where we would agree we would really be a pit crew for the patient. And that, I'm finding, is true across many problems in public health.
Exactly.
It's been, again, this idea that there are known ways that you can be more effective. And can we make it easy for people to adopt those known ways effectively? And if we show that it works, then you kind of got to do it. and that's a hard place to come to.
So similar, we need to go from cowboys to pit crews for kids, all kids. So today we're specifically talking about math. How do we go from being math cowboys to math pit crews? So now let's move into the how, bridge our eye. Knowing what to do is different than knowing how to do it. And so when you're trying to move your culture, build your pit crew, Bridge Our Eye has many resources to help you get there. For example, when we enter schools and we start working with them, a lot of times we'll ask them questions about their math instruction and their math intervention. And typically the answers will go something like this. Well, I use this screening data. I get these X kids, 7, 8, and then I do this and I measure progress with this. And then we'll say, okay, great. What about the other 40 kids? Who do they go to? What do they do? Well, I think they go to the special educator, and I think that one goes to the general educator. And okay, and what are they doing? I'm not sure. How are they measuring progress? Well, we're supposed to use this tool, but I don't know if they're really doing that. So we're trying to move from cowboys to pit crews. Pit crews, like where everybody knows their role, they all work together, they're efficient, no, not a moment is wasted. Dr. Atul Gawande talks about a checklist. In MTSS and math work, we have tried flowcharts, checklists, intervention menus, you name it, we've been there. In the course of that evolution of practice, research to practice over 10 years, we now have adopted what we call the map. So now we're going to get into the map and how that helps people know what they are supposed to do. So I'm going to try to walk you through the map. Now, just like everything in MTSS and previously in response to intervention, RTI, it starts with screening. Screening, kind of like when you go to the eye doctor and you have that chart, right? It doesn't tell us everything we need to know, but as you read, the line where you can no longer read accurately tells the doctor something. Either you just need some mild prescription and you'll start with that thing where they try the different prescriptions, or maybe you need some really diagnostic tests. But it all starts with screening. Now I'm going to try to walk you through the map from step 1 all the way to the end. It's pretty dense. Try to follow with me. I know it's a lot. Okay, so the map starts with, at the top, entrance decision rules, where we use our math screening data to identify targeted student needs. Now, when we come into a building, we have to work with the tools that schools have. Sometimes they recognize that the tool isn't perfect. They're not happy with it, but we say, doesn't matter. It's what you have. It's what we're using. So in this particular middle school, they use Star Math. So we taught them, if they didn't already know, that there are already decision rules built into Star Math in the colored system. And you can see that intensive intervention is labeled roughly the 1 through 10th percentile, while intervention is roughly the 11th to 24th percentile, on watch, 25th to 39th percentile, and so on. Those decision rules have meaning. They're telling you something about students' foundational math skills. So kids higher than the 85th percentile, their math foundational skills are strong. They're ready for enrichment. So what does that look like as a targeted intervention, enrichment? Concepts and application work. What about the 40th percentile to the 85th? They have decent foundational skills. They may want to build a little bit more fluency, but they're good foundational skills. They also need concepts and application, but maybe not yet quite at the enrichment level that we have here. Students that are on watch are not at risk by their foundational skills. They're in the lower range of average, but on watch means we should watch them. We don't want them to dip. Most students that are on watch and even in intervention, we know that they have the skills. They're just slower than we would like, less efficient than we would like, and maybe a little bit less accurate. So the targeted intervention would be fluency. Addressing computational fluency into generalization, right? The ability to apply those skills into novel situations. This is similar to intervention, whereas those in the 1st through 10th percentile they are far behind at this point. And the general education curriculum is what got them here. So no, we don't want to do more of that. They're going to need a very different type of intervention, a multi-component, explicit, systematic intervention with metacognitive and behavioral approaches embedded. Why? Because what we know about this profile of learner is that they are the most complex. They're complex behaviorally. They likely have attention struggles, memory struggles, possibly language struggles. So this intervention needs to remediate for all of that together in one. So in this particular school, they give a placement test for their intervention, their multi-component intervention, to know exactly where to start. Okay, the map. The top is the entrance decision rules, which then categorizes students' need. In special education, a lot of times when we enter with schools, what we hear is, well, those kids have IEPs, so we don't really look at the universal screening. They just go over there. Special ed takes care of them. MTSS is an all-child system. So It isn't either special ed or the things we do for all kids. It has to be both. So one of the first changes we make is students with IEPs have to be in the map, and we're going to do our best to follow it with them so that what they get from special ed is in addition. Okay, next. Now we want to look at that cohesive instruction and intervention. Cohesion does not only mean that we only use our core instructional materials for every tier. Cohesion means we're meeting different students' needs the way they need to be met, and we want them to generalize that into their core instruction. So here you can see at Tier 1, all students are receiving this school's high-quality core curriculum, which in this particular school is Agile Mind. And the entrance decision rules, right, up here at the top tell us that the kids in these two categories right here would be unlikely to do well with the core curriculum without scaffolding. If we don't want to build more gaps with our Tier 1 instruction, you need to scaffold for access for these students. And when we think about special education, well, if the student with an IEP falls into these two at-risk columns, which they don't always, having an IEP doesn't presume that they struggle in math, okay? So they can have, students with IEPs can fall in all of these categories just like any student. But we can see here that if they fall into these two categories, the scaffolding you see listed here are accommodations. That's what accommodations are. They are scaffolding to ensure access to general education instruction and curriculum so that the student can access their grade level learning. Meanwhile, so while all kids are getting Tier 1, there's also a need for targeted intervention. And again, the upper level students are ready for enrichment. So they might work on word problem intervention, like advanced multiplicative schemas, because this is a middle school. The middle level group really needs to work on computational fluency and generalization. They may have PALS math, peer-assisted learning strategies, which leaves time as well for doing some of the gen ed core curriculum because it's 3 days a week, 20 minutes. And finally, those students that need that multi-component, they should be having a double block. By this level of intensity, you're not going to solve the problem with 20 minutes a couple times a week. They're going to need 5 days a week with an entire period dedicated to this multi-component math intervention where a placement test or diagnostic placed them. And so now you can see how this works together, right? So we scaffold, look at these most at-risk students. We have Tier 1 scaffolding to make sure that they can access their core instruction because conceptually they can still understand it. They just have these foundational gaps. Meanwhile, we are filling the foundational gaps and we're going to measure the progress to make sure it's working. In these middle of the road kids, we're going to actually make them more fluent simply by more practice. Peer-assisted learning strategies can be a class-wide intervention or a targeted intervention where students are simply doing much more practice. We know struggling learners in math sometimes need an upwards of 30 extra trials of practice to move things into their long-term memory and proficiency into fluency. So here we have an intervention that does that. Meanwhile, the upper level students are working on word problems, and as they get better at it, we can provide enrichment problems. And then come the winter, right? If this is the fall, come the winter, some students in here, probably a lot of them, are now moving over here, and everybody just starts moving to the right. We're creating a system. And so you'll notice that there are math stages of learning, right? We know that there are stages that go from acquisition to proficiency into fluency, and then generalization and maintenance. And acquisition means you don't yet have the skill, right? Your performance is low, your errors are high. What you need here is explicit modeling, very, very explicit. And you can see here that we have a multi-component explicit intervention. And we also, because we're a multi-tiered systems of support, we recognize that academics don't live in a silo by themselves. Behavior and executive functions all interplay. We have added those factors too, the behavioral supports and the metacognitive supports. Now, for the students who have the skills, but they have not yet moved it to proficiency and fluency, they need more guided practice. See, their errors might be low, but their performance really isn't where it needs to be. It's kind of middle of the road. These are the kids I observe, classrooms sometimes, and these are the kids I see counting on their fingers. Like, do they get the answer right? Yeah. Did they survive? Yeah, but did they get the number correct by the end of that time period as kids who are really skillful? No, they didn't. They need more guided practice into independent practice. And you can see on our map, that's what PALS does. PALS puts two peers together, PALS. They guided practice each other, and then the end of the routine is independent practice, and it has a cumulative review throughout. All of these are curriculum agnostic, meaning these interventions, like everything else on Bridge, are pedagogy. They are routines of instruction. So you can do them with Agile Mind. They're great and complementary. And then finally, we've got the high level kids. They're looking for more generalization and maintenance or higher level skills. And you can see here, we've got them in word problems. And again, when we think about special education, remember, students with IEPs can fall in any one of these columns. Okay. So sometimes when we start working with schools and they say, oh, well, the students with IEPs go over there. We don't put them in our MTSS, our intervention groupings. Well, what ends up happening is the special educator gets one kid who's in this column, one kid who's in this column, and one kid who is in this column, and they're all together in one group. How is that special educator supposed to address a concepts and application need, a fluency need, and an explicit multi-component need all in one group with one time slot? That's never going to happen. That won't work. Okay, so what we find is if we put students with IEPs in the correct category, then they have least restrictive access to the intervention that is most suited to their needs to ensure progress. Now, it just so happens, doesn't always, that you will find often this lowest column does happen to be, say, 4 kids have IEPs out of 6. But there are often 1 or 2 who don't have IEPs. And so as you later on think about roles, you might think that this will end up being special educator doing this group, maybe, if 4 of the students in it are their student, but that other kids with IEPs will be sprinkled where their needs are being met. And that is how it is supposed to work. So now the bottom of the map is, how do we make sure that what we are doing is working? Progress monitoring expectations. And one of the keys here is making sure that everyone is doing it. So no matter who has this column here with the low-level kids and they're implementing this particular intervention, connected math concepts, they must progress monitor weekly. This particular school is using a cadence because STAR took too long to use as their progress monitoring, and they want their computation goals set to well above typical, which is the rate of improvement norm-based goal setting. And then they're still going to want to monitor with STAR just because they want to make sure that they're going to, by the next benchmark window, the fall, winter, spring, they want to make sure the achievement gap is closing. So every 6 to 8 weeks, they'll do one with STAR with a goal set to ambitious. You can see each column, okay, right? Now we've got the intervention kids. They each have their progress monitoring expectations laid out. Why? So that you can answer no matter who is the interventionist, no matter where that child is being served, you know how they were identified for the need, you know what need is being met and how they are being progress monitored. And when we think about IEPs, very often what we see written in IEP goals are not assuring that the achievement gap is closing. They might be mastery measures that the student could forget what they learned 2 weeks later. They might be something teacher made that doesn't really have any known reliability and validity. What we want to see is if this is the system for progress monitoring that we have set up for all students, then this should be the progress monitoring that we build in and follow for students with disabilities. Why? Because we don't want to give them less. And we also need to make sure that we're using solid tools and we're setting rigorous goals. I will also point out that you'll notice the far left here with the most growth needed, they have rigorous goals, right? Set to well above typical on a cadence, set to moderately ambitious on STAR. A lot of times teams that I work with feel a little nervous about that at first. And I'm saying, guys, if students with disabilities start here and the other kids are here, You can't have this tiny little goal and think you're ever going to achieve what you're looking for. It has to be a rigorous goal. And don't worry. See what you've got going on here? This is going to move things. You watch, I will show you. Okay, so putting it all together, the map puts everything cohesively together for every member of your grade level team, every member of your school. Even parents understand it if you show it to them. It shows entrance decision rules that tell us who are the kids, and it leads into what are their targeted needs. It illustrates targeted instruction at tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, where all students get core. And it shows clearly defined systems and roles. And finally, clear progress monitoring expectations. And please notice that while today's talk is not about data-based individualization, we know that 2 to 5% of students, even in this awesome made system, will be not responsive. They will not have adequate growth. If 4 data points are below the goal or aim line, we have a data-based individualization meeting. And often, not always, often those students are the most complex students. So there'll be students with disabilities in that mix. Okay, so what's the first culture change we're illustrating? We want to go from cowboys, improving math outcomes for students with IEPs is the special educator's job, to a system, a pit crew. Improving math outcomes for students with IEPs is everyone's job. What's my role? So here you can see the map helps us define roles, so things cohesively fit. If Mr. Perez is the tier 1 teacher, he knows, ooh, these are the 7 kids I need to scaffold for. I have to watch them closely. Those are my kids that really need some monitoring. And I'm probably going to have to collaborate with the special educator to know what that looks like. The special educator or tier 3 or specialist is doing the double block of the connected math concepts. And because it's a very explicit, systematic kind of mapped out program, she can even have the assistance of a paraprofessional or even a volunteer, anyone who's well trained, and it's going to progress monitor like this. Meanwhile, the other 2 grade level tier 1 teachers are going to run a targeted group, right? One's running enrichment, and the other one is running intervention with peer assisted learning strategies. Now, all the team members, everybody at the grade level, is doing a targeted role. We are a pit crew. We are giving kids exactly what they need in the most efficient way, and then we are returning them back to core. Okay, so let's move to the what. The what is a multi-tiered system of support, all hands on deck. Knowing what to do doesn't mean you know how to do it, right? So we need to talk about how do we take the how we just described and give people the skills to be able to do it. Enter Bridge RI. Bridge RI is Rhode Island Department of Education's funding into a blended professional development platform. It is free. You can use it any time of day. You can embed it in your common planning time, use it with people in your building leading the work, PLC style. It is at mtsri.org. And you'll see that if we reference this map as an image, every single thing I have taught you about that map today is trained on Bridge RI. So if we start with tier 1, see here in the green, look across here at tier 1. Now, what if Mr. Perez says, hey, I see in the map I'm in charge of scaffolding for these kids who are at the 10th percentile. I don't know how to do that. I wasn't trained how to do that. Well, we have on Bridge RI trainings on supporting all learners in math, universal design, differentiated instruction, and scaffolding. We also have supporting language development in math, which are language scaffolds, also super helpful for multilingual learners. And peer-assisted learning strategies can be used at the tier 1 level class-wide if you have a core instructional need. Like, if you have many students falling in that at-risk category, too many to be only intervention. And there's more. These courses at the tier 1 level are best for principals, department chairs, math coaches, general education teachers, and co-teachers, including paraprofessionals. These courses are great if you have a paraprofessional in a course who's there to support, but maybe never has received any training on how to support kids. Very briefly, because it's not the purpose of today's conversation, please, when you use Bridge RI courses, know that we do not think appropriate use, the best use for systems change is to just volunteer your staff, hey, go do this course and then, do what it told you. Like, that's not good adult learning. It's not solid professional development. What we want to see you do is build this into your school improvement plan for the year. We want to see you lay out bridge courses PLC style. We want you to have a facilitator who's in charge of monitoring progress. And we want teachers to do a portion of a Bridge RI course, come together, talk about what they learned, talk about trying something in their classroom, and then come back together again. And the bottom of that map, the progress monitoring, will be how they will measure what's working in their cycles of inquiry. So now let's move to tier 2, right? Here across, you can see tier 2 was for some kids an intensive intervention, but a double block. Some kids, it was fluency intervention like PALS, and another group of kids, it was enrichment like word problems. The people trained for tier 2 are often math interventionists, which can be a lot of people in buildings. It could be a general education teacher, it could be a math specialist, it could be a paraprofessional. It can be a special educator too, but I find that most often, just by the way the map sorts out, it doesn't usually end up being the special educator, but if you have enough, it sure could be. And on Bridge RI, we have trainings and intervention materials for peer-assisted learning strategies, Pirate Math, which is word problem intervention. We have grades 1 and 2, we have additive schema. Grades 2 to 3, we have additive and multiplicative, and so on and so forth. Fraction face-off, another evidence-based intervention, is coming soon. Right now, it's being used for a study, but as soon as it's done, it'll be available for Rhode Islanders' use. And we're getting a preschool early numeracy intervention coming as well. Everything you need is here to train and implement. The word problem intervention manuals are in the course, and the PALS manual, the way to purchase it is built into the course, and the manual is very inexpensive. It's really just the cost of printing it. Okay, and then finally, by the time we get to this tier 3, right, those kids in the pink, they have a lot of intensive needs, but that tier 3 team also usually is who helps build this entire system, the map. And they're also the team that holds those child-by-child meetings that we call data-based individualization. These team members are often, a lot of schools call them their RTI team or their MTSS team, but that's a misnomer because MTSS is a school-wide framework, not a child-by-child framework. But the people who make up the child-by-child team are often math specialists, special educators, and related service providers. You should always have someone with a lot of behavioral expertise, like a school psychologist, because the most complex kids tend to be complex in a lot of ways. And on Bridge RI, we have these highly specialized courses for these specialists. For example, this map that you see here today, Tier 3 practices, validated interventions, and the map. That course teaches how to build this map, along with a Bridge RI person like myself, providing some consulting support. How you hold a DBI meeting is Tier 3 systems, and how you do the progress monitoring database decision-making that we have at the bottom is the Tier 3 data course. For those who are a little bit less specialized, like the Tier 1 and 2 folks, we also have Tier 2 data courses and Tier 2 systems courses, and those are sort of like the 100 version. So just so you know, we even have other courses for them as well. Okay, so we just had another culture change, right? Sometimes roles when we enter buildings like specialists and interventionists will say things like, well, I don't work with those kids. They're special ed, they go over there. Or kids get an IEP and all of a sudden we pluck them out of their intervention that's working. And we say, well, now that they get an intervention, they don't go over there. That's cowboy talk. What is pit crew talk? All kids are in the map. All kids get the supports aligned to their needs, IEP or not. Okay, so let's talk about an IEP more deeply. Enter Olivia. Olivia was determined to have a learning disability and qualified for an IEP. We know that Olivia's present level on the school's math universal screener, she consistently scored below the 10th percentile intensive intervention. So her present level is that she really needs a lot of math explicit instruction. Remember the map? Olivia would fall here. Next, an IEP would say, okay, if we have a need from the present levels, then we need a goal. What would be the goal if she's at the 10th percentile consistently? Well, we would write this. To progress in grade level math skills, Olivia needs multiple foundational skills explicitly and systematically addressed. and she needs tier 1 scaffolded to prevent new gaps. Remember the map? Hopefully you're seeing here how the map can help us do even better by students with disabilities, right? Making it a more data-driven and robust system. And having clear roles across settings, right? So now Mr. Perez knows he needs to scaffold, and the special educator, I forgot her name, sorry, knows that she needs to do an explicit systematic multi-component intervention wherever the placement test puts Olivia. Now, an IEP should have progress monitoring benchmarks, right? Benchmarks that we report back to the family about how progress is going. Olivia's progress will be measured in her supplemental small group intervention using weekly progress monitoring probes with a goal of 77 points based on the benchmark. So when we want her goal line to look like, this is what the graph would look like. See the green? This is the goal. So if her student data looks like this, then we know we need to intensify, right? We can't be providing this kind of assurances for other students and then not provide it for students with IEPs. Everybody needs to provide this kind of insurance. And if we see that progress is not adequate, then we will hold a data-based individualization meeting. Remember down here? If 4 data points are below the goal line, we hold a data-based individualization meeting. So once again, you can see the IEP has many of its foundational pieces addressed in the map. And then we further individualize, sorry, should have moved to this slide. And then we further individualize using the progress monitoring data. And what we're going to learn is what works for Olivia, and then what works can be expanded into other parts of her IEP. Now, if we look here at Henry, maybe Henry actually, his present levels say that he is at the 25th percentile on the universal screener. So even though he has an IEP, he is not here in the most intensive level. He actually belongs in what we often call this a gen ed intervention, right? PALS. He's going to remain here in his core classroom, and he is going to do peer-assisted learning strategies. And our point is not a student having an IEP doesn't always mean that their needs are intensive. They can be as diverse as all students. Okay, next culture change. In cowboy culture, MTSS is general education. Special education lives over here. It's separate. We want you to see that MTSS and special education are seamlessly integrated, or at least that's our goal. We're working on it. MTSS strengthens special ed. Special ed strengthens MTSS. So students with disabilities can be at all tiers based on their needs. That's least restrictive. And we want to make sure that their needs are met at every level. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this presentation.